the beginning that you have made.
I'm editor of The Forward. I've been in this job for 2 years now, since June of 2008, and I think it's the best job in Jewish journalism, but we can discuss that. We're trying to position ourselves as being the source for American Jewish news here and in America. I really got started in college at my university, where I became the editor of the college newspaper, and because the university had only recently become co-ed, I was actually the first woman to ever edit my college newspaper. And honestly, because of the changes in journalism, that became a pattern for me. I've been the first woman in a great many jobs, including this one now at The Forward. It's not so much an issue as that you are breaking ground, and sometimes it's just symbolic. The old boys network that existed is suddenly broadened. Probably the men around don't feel it anywhere near as acutely as the women do. I worked for 25 years at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and in one of my jobs in which I was the first woman, I was the first woman to be an editor. And when I just started on the board, they didn't have an office for me, and so they renovated what had been a men's bathroom into my office. And people used to come. I'll never forget the governor of Pennsylvania once coming and expecting that my office was going to be a men's bathroom, and there were all these jokes about the John becoming a Jane. So sometimes it's those kinds of things, like you literally have to make room for women. But I think more importantly, the reason that I very strongly believe that there ought to be all kinds of people in journalism is because we see the world slightly differently. We tell our stories in a different way. I find that there are things that I emphasize in my tenure at The Forward that are different than my male predecessors. I'm not saying they're better. Just we all think about the world differently.
Give me examples for what? Like
sure, I'd be happy to. We just won a big award from the Society for Professional Journalists for 2 big stories that we did last year. When I say we, it was myself and several other members of our staff. And the stories detailed in one case, the fact that very few Jewish communal organizations have family leave policies, even though the majority of the people who work for them are women, and theoretically we are a culture that prizes family and children. The second story looked at the 75 largest organizations in Jewish communal life, the federations, the schools, the advocacy groups, just to see who was in charge, men or women, and what were they earning. And what we found, unfortunately, was that the number of women was very, very small, much smaller than what you saw in the nonprofit sector as a whole in America. And their salaries were a fraction of what the men were earning, in part because the men were in the high-paying positions. It's not, I don't believe that somebody was saying, oh, she's a woman, we'll pay her less. It's just that the fact that, for example, until a month ago, none of the 19 largest federations in the United States, and that's like a defined group, none of them had ever been run by a woman, ever. Do you realize that until a month ago, when that changed, there were more Jewish women on the United States Supreme Court than there were running a major federation? And the argument is, well, the women may not be so good at this, well, they'll have trouble raising money. And you want to say, excuse me? Let's see. There are Jewish women who run some of the major Ivy League universities in America. Don't you think they have to raise a lot of money? There's a woman who's Speaker of the House of Representatives. She is supposed to be one of the most formidable fundraisers in politics today. So it just doesn't make any sense. And this evolution, we're behind on this.
I know that your next appointment is in Ramallah.
Yes.
What are you trying to get? What are you trying to understand?
Well, I want to, first of all, I've never been to Ramallah. You know, the New York Times just said it's the new hot spot for nightlife. I'm not doing that. I'm a journalist, and when I come here, I shouldn't just spend all my time talking to people who I think I agree with. You know, I've had some really interesting, and I must say, unsettling conversations with people who I don't necessarily agree with, who've caused me just in the last few days to rethink certain assumptions that I've made. And that's really healthy. That's what we should be about. I mean, I'm very grateful that I can have these conversations in a civil, respectful way. You know, we can't just exist in an echo chamber. And so just like I've had conversations with people who are more, if you will, to the right of where I might be, I also think it's important for me to meet with Palestinian leaders and understand their point of view. And so when I was here last year, I spent a day on the West Bank going to different settlements, talking to people there. It was enormously instructive. You know, we in the States have a tendency to say, the settlements, and they're all the same. Well, they're not all the same. You know, frankly, I'm not afraid of criticism, and I don't think the Israelis should be, as long as it's knowledgeable and as long as it comes with a deep sense of love and loyalty. And where I particularly draw the line is that I think one has to believe in the legitimacy of Israel as a Jewish state. But I don't think we should be afraid of J Street any more than we're afraid of AIPAC. I think we need to engage lots of different points of view. Look, we journalists our default mechanism is to look for what's going wrong, right? So, you know, part of it is, oh, you're just afraid that all you're doing is writing stories about Jews behaving badly. And there are many choices every week to do that. So I find part of it is that I have to kind of gird myself to not become too cynical. It's why I'm so glad to be here. I come at least once a year and meet with lots of different kinds of people because I get unbelievably energized, and it's not like I'm sugarcoating things in conversations, but it's really important to understand how people are confronting the big issues here and what they're doing about it, and the diversity of opinion, and the optimism, even in the face of some pretty, you know, difficult challenges. I think the fact that Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, approached the Forward to publish an edition of the Forward in Israel, albeit in English, every week, is just one of many signs of a recognition in Israel that what is happening in the diaspora is important and valid. But I think, as we spoke of earlier, we also need to understand how essential Israel is to our political, religious, and cultural life. So it has to go both ways.